How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
Parker.
Mm-hmm.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
And over the break, we didn't take a break, but over the break, I had a thought.
Yeah.
What if you made a movie? Like, okay, you know how Citizen Kane is considered one of the greatest films of all time?
Yeah.
Imagine, if you will, that someone made a movie about how Citizen Kane happened.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't the production. We don't need to know about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not interesting. I want to know about the political and social situation in our country, in primarily the state of California, that led one man, let's get that right,
Mm-hmm.
to write Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a good idea for a movie? Do you think I could write that? Do you think I could make that happen?
Those are two different questions. Could you make it happen? Sure. Would it be a good movie? I doubt it.
Well, unfortunately, Parker, I have bad news for you. It exists, and it's called Mank.
Shit. Cool. 2020's Mank.
2020's Mank. Directed by David Fincher.
Hmm.
Written by Jack Fincher, David Fincher's father, in the 90s. And from what I understand, a few touch-ups to the script were made.
Sure.
But it's Mank. And
It's Mank.
Parker, I feel like I need to start this episode. Start the year off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a good place. I need to apologize. You know how typically at the time of recording, 5 days into the year, you need to apologize?
Yeah.
I'm sorry I made you watch Mank. Look, okay, maybe that's not fair, because there are things to like about the movie.
Sure. There's 50% to like about this movie.
I am inclined to agree. So obviously I did make you watch this, but surely you were aware of this movie before
I was
brought it to
aware
the
of
show?
this movie. Yes, I knew it existed. I had seen the trailers. I had heard people talk about it. And as a noted Citizen Kane shrugger, we'll call it, just kind of meh, you know?
Sure.
I really didn't care. I didn't care. And most of the people that I knew who watched this at the time also told me it was fine, you know? That's essentially it. And then you brought it up for the podcast to wrap it back into Citizen Kane for the beginning of the year. And I said,
Yeah.
Sure. And while I was watching this, I was worried because I couldn't remember, and I didn't want to look at your review until afterwards. I couldn't remember if you were really jazzed about this movie or not. And I was not having a good time. And I was like, man, this is going to suck so bad if Max is like, oh, this movie's really interesting and really good. And then I come in and I'm like, I don't know, man.
I sent you a picture of a napping Orson Welles.
You
and
did.
I was like, I just watched Mank.
Yeah. And that's what I gathered from
And you
this.
weren't
I was
you
like,
weren't
okay.
sure if I was taking a happy nap, if I was happy
Yes.
to have napped
Yeah, happy
to Mank.
nap. Uh-huh. A
A
peaceful slumber.
Mank just puts you right into a peaceful slumber.
Mm-hmm. What's your history with this film?
Thank you for keeping us on track, Parker. I remember being excited as it was, as trailers were coming out. I didn't think I watched any of the trailers, but I was aware that the movie was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
This came out at the tail end of 2020, which was a big year for Max and movies, like a big year of me watching important movies. I think I watched Citizen Kane either that year or the year before for the first time. And, I was like, it's David Fincher, who's a guy who people like, because at the time I hadn't seen, I don't think, any of his other films.
Whoa. This was your first Fincher?
No, I'd seen The Social Network.
Okay.
That's a lie.
Whoa,
No, I'd seen
point.
I had seen The Social Network. But yeah, I I saw it. I remember I watched it with my dad on Netflix, which is where it was showing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were both just kind of confused and bored. And I gave it 3 stars. And that was, and I didn't even write anything about it. And that was it. And then just over 4 years later, I've returned to Mank. I've Manked again.
Yeah.
Live
to make another day.
Live to make another day. And I was curious going into this because last year I read a whole book about the making of Citizen Kane.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, maybe the movie Mank, maybe I'll have a more respect for it. I'll like it more if I know the story in another place, which is a terrible way to review a movie.
Having to do homework to like a movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And so like that shouldn't be necessary.
Sure.
But I was curious if I would like it more, having, learned a little bit more. I don't. I didn't. I liked it less.
Yeah.
And especially after years of watching more old Hollywood.
Yep.
I really don't like where this movie lands with it.
Mm-mm.
Because it feels like it's trying so hard.
Yeah.
And that's my history with the film. Do you want to, let's just talk about our opinions of the movie for a little while, because that's what I'm most excited to do.
Okay, so let's get the good out of the way first, because it's a lot shorter than my problems with the movie. The good, beautifully photographed, like gorgeous to look at, really stunning.
Looks like a dream.
Looks like a dream. It's really, really lovely. I'm assuming because I was curious because in the opening credits, it has a little VistaVision style logo, but it says high dynamic range. So I'm like, okay, was this shot on digital and then like post-processed to look like film?
It was.
Okay.
This was shot in black and white on red cameras.
I see.
And then they added grain, they added cigarette burns, they did all of that stuff.
The grain was mostly fine. The cigarette burns got on my nerves after a while.
Yeah.
Like they felt like, I don't know, it felt like first year film school to me. It's like, oh, hey, we're going to add this on because it, like, I don't know, like a couple times is fine, but it just kept happening and it was really distracting every time. Especially because I knew in my gut, I was like, I'm almost positive this was shot on digital. And that feels tacky to me.
You know what else feels tacky is typewriter transitions to flashbacks.
Oh my God. Oh, I hated it. I hated it so much. I turned to Ellie and I go, do you think this is a movie about screenwriters?
Wait, is this movie about a guy who writes?
Yeah, no, those suck. But okay, I got to stay on the good.
Sorry.
No, you're good. The way it's photographed, I like a lot. Performances overall, pretty solid. A touch hammy, a touch much for sure.
Gary Oldman is like, he's hamming. He's hamming a little bit. And also like,
I'm not crazy about him. I like Lily Collins. I think Lily Collins does a good job in this.
She's very good at playing a young woman.
Totally. She doesn't have anything to do, but what she's doing, she does well with,
Yeah, she is a young woman whose husband is in the war. And it's wild how, and I feel like it's intentional. It has to be intentional. Or David Fincher just went, hey, this one's for you, Dad. And like, because it's the most, like, not to get to the bad stuff and not to skip too much, but also whatever. Who cares about Mank?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. The ending of this, before we do the Oscars acceptance stuff, is like a parody of a 40s film.
It's crazy.
Mank, he's alive. He's washed up on a shore. Whoa. And he's like, well, and then she's like, are you ever serious? Or are you ever funny? Or are you ever serious? And he's like, only serious about things that are funny. What does he say?
Yeah, it's
yeah. Do you ever stop being
serious?
Funny?
No. What is
do you ever stop being funny? And he's like, what? Wait, he's only funny about things that are serious or something.
I think it's
one of his.
It's
a classic Mankism, just what a witty guy. And it's like, and I'm glad that's not the end, but also like, it is. And
it is.
It's just wild how and she's playing it pitch perfect. Like
she's doing
said.
great.
Like,
again,
she's doing great at what she has.
I think she toes the line really well. I do like Charles Dance. I think Charles Dance's Hearst is like a highlight for me. He's very. I like him quite a bit.
What do you think of Amanda Seyfried as Marion Davis?
I like her. It's there once in a while. it's a bit she falls into Gary Oldman territory of just being a caricature of what
Yes.
somebody from the 30s and 40s would be, you know?
Yeah.
But for
Yes.
like she has some very real moments. I really like the conversation they have when she comes to visit him at the ranch and being
Yes.
like, don't do this. Like, please, like for him, not even for
Yeah.
me, but for him. Like that conversation I like a lot between the two of
Yeah.
them. So overall, I enjoy her. It's a bit much sometimes. What do you think of her?
It leans into like almost a Harley Quinn-ish territory at times.
That's a good call. That's a very
and
good
like it is really good. And
Mhm.
she's also like her performance is just fun to watch.
Yeah.
And I think in the same way that Gary Oldman as Mank would be fun to watch if we were only getting him sporadically.
Mm-hmm.
But like
Mm-hmm.
every scene is like, what if Mank was the funniest, smartest guy in the world?
You
And
know
they're
what it
just
is?
like, what?
Is that there's a version of this movie that is very interesting as like a co-lead between Mank and Wells and jumping back and forth between them, where
Yes.
because like you talking about that, where he's like, oh, if he showed up less, if this was like Curse of the Black Pearl levels of Jack Sparrow, if he was showing up that much, but this is later, this is like Stranger Tides. Mank is the main character. It's like he doesn't work here. He doesn't. Like if you shuffled him off to the side, made him a co-lead, I could handle this a little more.
Wait, so you're telling me that maybe Mank wasn't the most interesting character to base a movie around? That maybe Herman Mankiewicz wasn't the guy that we want to spend so much time with? Because Tom Burke showing up as Orson Welles is always exciting.
Yeah, he does a really good job.
I feel like I heard at the time that someone dubbed the voice in, and then I tried to find any word on that, and there's no word on that, but there is a man credited in the movie cast on IMDb as a man's voice.
Huh.
And I feel like that's probably it.
That could, because that was the thing I was wondering.
But I couldn't find any articles that confirmed this, but I feel like I remember just hearing at the time that it's not Tom Burke doing the voice.
Right. Because that was the first thing I noticed is like, it's a really good sound alike.
Yeah.
And it would track for me that they found somebody who could do the voice but doesn't look enough like Orson and isn't like an actor, you know?
Yes,
like
and I think
on-screen actor.
And I think that's what this is. I'm fairly certain, because why would they credit it as a man's voice?
Yeah.
Like that feels like you know, John Lennon in Yesterday being credited as the cowboy or whatever, you know?
Right.
Like it feels like that to me.
I could see that. I could see that for sure.
Tom Burke does look enough like him that it works, except I don't know, something about the goatee just throws it off for me, where I go, why aren't you clean shaven? Like, I know that he had a beard.
Right.
But it just, I don't know, it threw me off.
No, I agree. It was a little odd.
But he does have what I think is the funniest delivery in the movie, which is he throws the liquor at the fireplace at the end of the movie, and Mank goes, "That's what we need. This is what needs to happen when Susan leaves Kane." And then Wells stops and he goes, "Maybe." And then he storms out, and I'm like, that's what the whole movie could have been.
Right. Okay. So okay. I think last good thing I want to shout out as far as casting. We were robbed of having more of Bill Nye as Upton Sinclair. Give me like a movie of that, please.
I know. He's really great. And I love that he's just at a distance. Like it's a really good.
You get him in profile for a second.
It's a really good little cameo. But not even a cameo, it's just a good casting.
Yeah, very good. Wish we got more of him. Okay, so you talking about this could have been the whole movie. I firmly believe like the best version of this movie is a stage play, and it stays in the house. It stays in the house with him writing with Lily Collins, and it is a bottle episode. You know, you just stay there. It's a chamber play. That's the term I'm looking for. That would be very interesting to me. And like, it's like, okay, you know, they set up interesting stuff with that. I'm like, okay, you've got 60 days to do it. Well, I thought I had 90 days. Nope, you got 60 days. It's like, okay, well, I'm on a time crunch. I've got to do this. And like, all of the stuff going on in there is interesting to me. And then every time it gets interesting, we cut to a flashback that really kind of doesn't matter. Like, that's the thing. The point of the flashback for me is like, okay, we need to understand what's going on with the people he knows. We need to understand what's going on with Hearst. We need to understand what is going on with Marianne Davies, all this stuff, right? You could do that in a scene. Like literally when he goes on to set and like they meet again while she's tied to the stake and he talks to Hearst. That's kind of all you need to do for us to understand the dynamics of this.
Right, but Parker, then it's not mimicking the structure of Citizen Kane.
Literally, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is that like they're trying to get cutesy with it. They're trying to be like, well, Kane did this, so we have to be like, no, you don't actually.
But also Kane didn't do awful little screenwriting typewriter title cards for every flashback.
They suck bad.
It's so unbelievably tacky in a way that Fincher usually isn't.
It feels like an iMovie preset. Like it feels like something I was playing around with when I was 12, and that was the only editing software I had. Because they had an Indiana Jones one. They had a globe you could do, and I thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
I know what you're talking about. I was right there with you.
Yeah.
But it's just like it feels like a preset. Totally. And it just, but yeah, like to your point, like I think that you're absolutely right that this works better as a chamber play. I love that. And having people come in it, like, revolving doors of all these people in Mank's life. And we can understand that he was involved in a lot of, he had this group of people. He's clearly, like, it could work if you want it to be about Mank, but Mank, I don't care.
I like the summation of like the structure issues for me in this. So to hear your point about not caring is after the election has happened and Sally is at the studio and he's drunk and he's like, this is my fault. I did the propaganda films. That's what cost him the election, all this stuff. That scene cuts away 3 separate times when you like, we should stay with this story because it's high stakes, and it keeps cutting away to go to some random boring bullshit back at the ranch, and then we come back to a man on the verge of suicide over and over and over again. And then
the result of that is that when his wife goes, oh God, he had a whole box, and we get the gunshot, it feels like a sketch. Like it feels like a sketch.
Totally.
Because we keep cutting away, it feels like, and now back to the man who's about to kill himself.
Like, and that's the thing is like, I don't care. Like any tension you're trying to build, you keep like releasing the pressure valve by cutting away back to present time. It sucks. It's a bad framing device.
The only time that cutting away really worked for me was at the end, because then you're doing dramatic tension where you have Mank being confronted by the two forces that create Citizen Kane, which is Hearst and Wells. And that makes sense as cutting between, because it's like, okay, like we get works. We cut out of the confrontation with Wells when Wells asks Houseman to leave, and we cut back to Hearst, and then we get Hearst doing the organ grinder, the organ grinder's monkey parable, which is a really great little moment of him just walking him out. And he doesn't even say, that's you. It's like one of like, it's like a moment of subtlety in the movie where he just says all of that. Not even subtle. He says all of that and he goes, goodbye, Mank. And he shuts the door. And then we go back to Wells and he throws the fit. And it's like, that's the only time that really worked for me. Because the rest of the time, you know what this movie feels like it's really wants to do? Yeah. And this, well, what it feels similar to me is Hail Caesar, the 2016 Coen Brothers movie. Have you seen it? Yeah. I like Hail Caesar.
I like Hail Caesar.
But that movie predicates itself on, we are capturing this moment in Hollywood, and that is really all that we're doing. You know? And this movie is like, it's about Mank, but it's also like, it's not about Mank, it's about the social circumstance. Like this is it's almost a documentary, but it's not. It's like a, and I know that that's what like a biopic, I understand like a bio documentary is that, but like...
Right, but this doesn't know what it wants to be about. Is it about the political situation in California at the time? Is it about the writing of Citizen Kane? Or is it about Mank? And it tries to be about all 3 of them, and it fails at all 3 of them. Like, I didn't learn anything about any of these pieces of information other than I didn't know that Upton Sinclair ran for office. That's it. That's the only piece of information that I was like, okay, well, that's something I didn't know. But like, pick one. If you're making a movie about the way that Hollywood and newspaper moguls intersect with politics, make that the movie. If you're making a movie about the writing of Citizen Kane, and specifically the movie ending on this note of him not getting credit, and that being the friction point, make the movie about that. Make the movie about him and Orson Welles and that friction point. If that is where you're landing, make it about that. But they don't.
It really feels like it's a movie that is the scene in Solo where Woody Harrelson hands Alden Ehrenreich all of the Han Solo stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what this whole movie is. It's just, we watch Mank go, like, and I'm glad that it doesn't have him go, that's a good idea, and write something down when something happens to him. But it almost is that.
Yeah.
Of like, when he's writing, it's like, well, now let's flash back to, why is this on his mind? It's like, if I wanted to know where Citizen Kane came from, I feel like a movie that is doing that a third of the time is not that interesting to me.
Yeah.
And if I want a movie that is about the socio, like the economic and political and like ecology of Hollywood in the 30s, this movie isn't doing that all the time.
Right. Well, it's also so strange to me that part of it might just be Charles Dance's performance, but also like, it can't just be him, because he's played charming villains you love to hate. Like Game of Thrones kind of made him famous for that. He's really good as Tywin Lannister. But like this, like for a movie that is trying to explain to you what Citizen Kane is and why it's written and how it's about this guy, it really doesn't, like, as far as his actions within the film, Hearst is pretty neutral. He's kind of a whatever guy. Like, he's chill. It's freaking Mayor that's the villain. Mayor's the piece of shit, right? But like, the most we get from Hearst is like a passing mention that he picked the cabinet members himself, right?
Right.
But like, he's never abrasive to anybody. He's never duplicitous. He's never like scheming. You never see him like, he's not at the party celebrating Upton Sinclair losing. He just seems like a pretty neutral businessman in this movie, which he was not.
Right. And that's just really interesting when he, like, yes, because if you're like, where did Citizen Kane come from? One, okay, this movie, first off, this movie is really outdated in its understanding of how Citizen Kane came to be. This movie owes a lot to Pauline Kael and Raising Kane and all of this stuff, which has been mostly discredited at this point. This notion that Orson Welles actually didn't write anything and that it was actually Mank who did everything and that it was about Hearst and it was all these things. It's like, no, it's mostly been like we've walked it back from there where we go, yes, Mank played a part in this, but ultimately the final product was Welles doing rewrites, like in the lead up to an onset of Citizen Kane. Like, and like they touch on that a little bit where like Houseman is like, this script is good. It's too long and it's too well written. Like there's just too many passages that are just like lengthy. And Welles is like a big part in editing that out.
Right. And Mank even says that. He's like, that's the director's job. Like he'll figure that out.
Right. But this movie is weird because it's like, we're not going to have Orson Welles in it that much. But we're also not going to paint him as the, like, Fincher, like, a major change that he made to the script after, based on his dad, because it's his dad's screenplay, and then he made some changes. And one of the changes that he had to make was he was like, it was a little too anti-Welles. Yeah. And I go, sure. But
at least also, that's something.
But, like, it's just like, and that's how I feel about the Hearst situation, too. Where it feels like you're looking at it from an angle of like, how did Citizen Kane get made? Well, it's about Hearst. Well, it's technically not just about Hearst. It's about a lot of different guys, but it is obviously, there's a lot that is based on Hearst. Right. But like, if you're doing that, the interesting thing about that is to show, because Charles Foster Kane is a terrible man. And the movie is about how he becomes a terrible man. Yeah. And like, this movie, I feel like should be going like, and look at the real guy. And that wouldn't be completely true because it's not just about that one guy.
But that's what this movie's aiming for.
That's what this movie's aiming for, but it's
why
just
not
not doing
double
that.
down on that? Exactly. Like that's the thing. It's like the closest we get is Mank's big lengthy monologue about, we're going to write a story about this guy who used to have ideals and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, so the worst you can say about Charles Dance's Hearst is that he used to have socialist ideals and now he's a capitalist.
Which
like
is
that
also
that
what... But that's also what Citizen Kane is.
Right. Like
so what is this movie offering?
What is this movie?
What is this movie offering that Citizen Kane doesn't already make clear in its fictionalized account of a man? Yeah.
Nothing. It doesn't. Like, that's the thing is like, it's, and it's frustrating too, because there are like, it's not a well-written script, but there occasionally are little like once in a while the zingers of dialogue do get to me, you know?
Yes.
Like I really like I think he's on the phone with his brother, Joe, and Joe says, "Well, I'm here representing the secondary characters."
Yeah, that's the one that I wrote down where
Yeah.
I was like, see, now that...
Like that's a good line.
And it also feels like that could have been the thesis for this movie.
Right.
But
Yeah.
is it?
No, it's not. It's not.
But,
And
yeah.
like that's it's just there are little moments like that. Like I like that line.
I also really like the line where they say, you know, they're saying that Rosebud is
Mhm.
a nickname that Hearst uses for Marion Davis's genitalia.
Mhm.
And this is where Mank's really funny, where he goes,
Yeah.
And he's like, is it? And he goes, it isn't though, is it? And he goes, only because I didn't know. Like,
Yeah.
which is really funny.
It's
Like,
really good.
like there are these moments, but like, and this is like my major did I cut you off? Did I cut off your
No,
thought
no,
that
no,
you
no,
were
go ahead.
sharing?
Yeah, we're just
Just
talking
that,
about
like,
lines.
About lines, and this is my letterbox review. This
Mhm.
line, this movie feels like every line is supposed to make you just go, "Oh my god!
Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny! Oh, he's so quick-witted!
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Well,
awesome!" And it's like not
Totally.
every line can be
It can't.
like
They can't all
we
they can't
earlier
be
this year,
that.
or sorry, last year, because I
Mhm.
forget that it's 2025 now.
Yeah, 2025.
Last year we
baby.
covered All About Eve,
Yes.
written and directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a movie where everyone in that movie has there's like really good lines.
Yeah.
But they aren't distracting.
Mm.
And I'm not someone who thinks that dialogue has to sound natural, because obviously that takes away from the art form of it. I think
Sure.
that dialogue is very interesting in that it's flexible and it doesn't have to sound like real people to be enjoyable. Right? Like a movie.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
this
mhm.
movie makes every line, not just from Mank, but like every line feel like it's the most funny and important thing that's ever been said, or it's a setup for that to happen.
Totally. You know, it's so interesting you bring that up because, like, I'm the same way. Like, dialogue doesn't have to sound natural, it has to sound appropriate to the world you've built, right? And what's really interesting that I hadn't connected until just now is something that you and I have talked about, like, really enjoying about The Social Network is the marriage of Fincher's pacing and Sorkin's dialogue, right? Like, there's a clip to that movie. Everybody is the most eloquent version of themselves you've ever heard, and they are constantly going back and forth. It's like a tennis match, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
boom, 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 boom. Fincher tries to do that here, and the dialogue isn't up to snuff ever. This whole movie, like, it is very rare there is a pause between anything. The party scene at Hearst's house, nobody interrupts each other. Everybody waits until the sentence is finished, and then immediately the next person starts talking. And they do that for like 5 minutes. And it was exhausting. I hated it. I was like, this is bad. This is bad pacing. It's bad dialogue. It's bad direction. Because everybody's just like, well, I heard that Upton Sinclair did this. Well, didn't you hear? He's a commie. A commie? Well, I have to. Like, it's high school theater levels of not letting characters breathe.
It is. And like you can do a movie that's bouncing around like that, like you're saying, The Social Network, or like
Right.
His Girl Friday. Like you can, and that's a movie where people are cutting each other off.
Totally.
But like you can do that, and there are plenty of movies of the time from the 40s, and I can see they're trying so hard. They're
Yep.
like, we want this to sound like, and they do a good job of making it literally sound like
Totally.
a 40s thing, because they recorded this in such a way that's a monaural, soundtrack. Like
Yeah.
it is recorded in a way, like I can't remember exactly the things, but they recorded it in the way that like those films were recorded.
Right.
So it sounds,
Well,
would have loved to hear it in a theater probably. Go ahead.
Yeah. You know what it is? This is the metaphor that's coming to mind. This movie, the exteriors, the veneer is trying to be like a classic trolley car. It's trying to be like, hey, look, we've got everything right. The lighting is right. The compositions are interesting. All these things. But the engine of the way it's directed, and specifically the way it's edited, and like the framing of it, the composition of the shots rather than just the assembly of them, right? Is you have your trolley car, but you stuck like monster truck wheels on the side of it, and that's the engine inside. Like, it's literally, because like that scene, right? So that scene of them all jumping on each other, going. If this was His Girl Friday, that would all be played in a master wide, and there wouldn't be any edits. We just see them bouncing around each other in the room. In that scene, there is a cut on almost every line of dialogue, which is a modern sensibility to editing. This movie has such a modern sensibility to its editing, but its aesthetics are trying to be classical Hollywood in its writing and in its presentation. but everything about what's going on under the engine of this thing, from being shot on digital to the way it's edited and directed, is trying to be as modern as possible. And it doesn't work. It's everything's falling apart at the axles.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Good metaphor, Parker.
Thanks.
It just doesn't make for like an interesting watch most of the time. And like, I can't really think of any shots that really stand out to me.
No.
Like, and that's so weird.
And it's so interesting because like the movie picks a style, and it's a boring style, to be frank. Like it's like visual, it's kind of whatever. It's just bland to look at.
Yeah.
And then they do one sequence that is a throwback to like Metropolis style avant-garde editing.
Oh, the election shades and yeah.
And they do that once, and I'm like, okay, cool. It works at Metropolis because they do it a couple times, and that's the style of the movie. You can't just throw that in here with the rest of your boring ass Netflix style shooting coverage.
Okay. Because I was going to make the joke and be like, but Parker, they did the funny little typewriter transitions. That's not of the time. That's and that feels like a Netflix sensibility to me.
Totally.
So, bummer.
Yeah, bummer.
Okay, just see if we missed anything.
You made a movie that you are trying to tell us should be projected on 35 millimeter. But it's a streaming movie, and we all know it's a streaming movie, and it's only a streaming movie. And that comes across in every aspect of it. And that does always have to be that way. I think that Rian Johnson does a really good job of threading that Netflix needle and still holding his own. But I don't know, there's just something about this which is surprising considering that, like, you know, it's a family passion project or whatever. Fincher just feels asleep at the wheel. It feels like he doesn't care at all about this.
Yeah. It's a weird movie.
Yeah.
But in like a boring way.
It's a boring way.
Just seeing if we missed anything. I don't feel like doing a recap.
I mean, what would we do? We just, okay, so, you know, the basic rundown that I'll just give in 30 seconds is Mank is he broke his leg, and he's been sent to a ranch by Orson Welles to write Citizen Kane, and as he writes it, we keep cutting back and forth to flashbacks of his life to give us context about the things he's writing. That's the movie. Like, there's nothing else.
It's weird that this movie keeps almost being a two-hander and then quickly veers away from it. Like, him and Lily Collins, and then it's like, sometimes it's him and Orson Welles, sometimes it's him and Marion Davis, sometimes it's him and his brother, and it's just like a scene of two-handers between two people, but it's like never that interesting.
No, it never, like, that's the thing, is like, it frustrates me because, like I said, there's versions of this movie that are very interesting to me. I would be very interested in a chamber play of him and Lily Collins just hanging out. Because, like, again, there are scenes in the movie that feel like it's two movies edited together in, like, the fact that none of the thematic threads pull on each other, like, from one storyline to the other. But within context of themselves, they exist, right? Like, Sally killing himself is a thematic moment of Mank being like, maybe I'm duplicitous in this system. Maybe I can be vocal about my opinions, but I'm really not doing anything. And so I've been asleep at the wheel and I should do something, right? Same thing with, like, Lily Collins having these frustrations with him the whole time. And it's a bad scene. It's a cheesy way out, but, like, at least it makes sense of the other housekeeper being like, hey, he, like, brought me and my entire village over from Germany. Like, he paid for our legal visas to get here. And she's like, oh, I didn't know. I misjudged the man. Like, and then it's a cheesy beat, but at least makes sense.
But then she goes back in and drinks with him, and he goes, a blabbermouth. Like, and I don't know why I gave him a British accent. He's got a weird accent in this movie.
Yeah,
Joe doesn't sound like that. Why does he sound like that?
He doesn't. There were, like, several times where he would say something, and I haven't even seen the movie. I've just seen lots of clips where I'm like, oh, you're doing your Winston Churchill. What are you doing, Gary? Like, but
weird.
Anyway, like, to that point of that scene, like, there is, like, if you stayed with these three characters and had a revolving door of other people coming in and out of his life, but, like, we stayed with that core group, that's an interesting movie. If you made a movie about the frictions between Mank and Orson Welles making Citizen Kane and writing Citizen Kane, that's an interesting movie. If you made a movie about what the social political situation was in California at the time and how it intersected with Hollywood and focused more on Hearst, that's an interesting movie. But none of these together work because you're half-baked ideas on all of them.
Yeah. It's just like a bunch of half-baked ideas. Because like the MGM stuff is vaguely interesting, but
yeah,
like I do like the guy who's playing Irving. What's his name? Irving Tishner. Irving Thalberg. Who's Irving Tishner? I don't know who that is. Irving Thalberg is like, I think that guy looks so much like a guy from this era. Like he just, I don't know, just looks like I was like, have I seen a picture of this guy? Like he just looks like he'd be in a picture in like your film history textbook.
Totally.
But like that's kind of, but that's not that you can't. You need a character for that, and Mank being there is kind of interesting. But but we're not staying with Mank there. We're going everywhere else, and like the Upton Sinclair election and like the propaganda film, like that's an interesting story.
Totally.
But it's like 4 seats back. It's like not even the back seat. It's like in a van. It's like the 4th back seat in this movie about Herman Mankiewicz. It's just odd. It's just an odd duck of a movie, and it's just weird. Yeah,
it's just a weird, and like it. You may disagree with me on this, but it does fall in line for me with Citizen Kane of, I don't know how you want me to feel about this guy. What am I supposed to think about Mank? And not in like an ambiguous choose your own adventure, that's good writing way. It's just like, you don't feel, it feels like this movie doesn't know who this character is.
Citizen Kane doesn't have an internality to it. Right. And that I do know is intentional. This movie doesn't provide, like, it provides a little bit of internal nature of Mank.
Right.
But ultimately it feels like any ambiguity is accidental in a sense. Like Citizen Kane at least feels intentional to me. Feels like it's trying to do that. This movie, I don't even really fully know what this movie wants us to think other than that Mank was a really smart, funny guy who got screwed over by Hollywood. And it's kind of by Orson Welles.
Totally. And it especially the end, feels like it leans way too hard on kind of the, frankly, the antithesis of this show. Is just everybody being like, this is the greatest thing I've ever read. Like, this movie is floated by this being the greatest object in the world. And it's like, it's really good. Like, Mank, you wrote a really good script. Like, you and Orson, good work, good job. But we don't get to see that Orson did any work on this. This movie tells us it was all Mank and he got ripped off. And that's not true.
No, but Pauline Kael would be so stoked.
Oh, Pauline Kael would love this movie.
Mank was getting his due, We've
overcorrected.
We've overcorrected. I simply think, like, I like Citizen Kane more than you.
Yes.
And I, watching this movie, it just gets annoying having so many people be like, "This is the greatest thing you've ever written." It's King Lear. It's the greatest thing ever. It's gonna be the greatest thing ever made. It's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good, Mank. Don't do it, Mank. It's good. And it's like, I don't know. Maybe I would rather just watch Citizen Kane and be like, it's good.
Literally.
Than hear a bunch of people.
And I was like, man, I think I'd rather just be watching Citizen Kane right now.
This is one of the few movies, folks, that we've brought to the show that Parker goes, yeah, I'd rather sit down and watch Citizen Kane than watch Mank.
Yeah, if I'm going to be swimming in the waters of Kane, if I'm going to be there at this destination, let me just be there. I don't want to hear the secondhand half-assed account. Like, I just don't care.
It's just really weird that this movie is trying so hard to be like, Citizen Kane happened because maybe Citizen Kane happened in real life.
Yeah.
But it didn't. But also Mank. I do like how many people constantly are going, Mank, remember me?
Well, the filmmakers like that too. That was the entire trailer, was just a series of people saying
true.
Mank. Mank.
Do you agree that the title needs an exclamation point?
100%. 100%. Why it's missing? Why isn't it there? I fully assumed it had one for a while.
We could start a Nelson Mandela, like a Mandela effect.
Yeah.
Of exclamation point.
Here's
Mank.
what we do. We go in. We find. I think they use the movie database. Like themoviedatabase.com is where Letterboxd sources all of its metadata. We go in. We add a bunch of movie posters that just add an exclamation point, and we just let that ruminate for a while. And just when people go to pick their custom posters on Letterboxd, like, Mank! Exclamation point. That one. And then we're in.
Yeah, I think we're in. Mank! Exclamation point. Just give it the exclamation point.
Just give it. Come on. It would be the most exciting thing about this movie.
I don't know. Bill Nye showing up as Upton Sinclair is pretty exciting.
That is pretty, like, that was thrilling. And like you texted me, and I would have felt this way regardless, but now I was ultra thinking about it. Like, genuinely, you're right. This entire movie feels like the JFK name drop in Oppenheimer. Like, anytime they mention the Wizard of Oz or any other movie star or political figure, FDR, it feels like the filmmaker wants us to go like, oh, they said it. He said this thing. Oh, whoa, he said the thing. And the whole movie's that way. We've
talked about the Oppenheimer thing of just Alden Ehrenreich, for context, if you don't remember, but Parker and I will never forget because it's so funny, the way that Alden Ehrenreich says, yeah, a young senator named John F. Kennedy. And he says it to Strauss as he leaves, and Strauss is like, oh. And it's like, JFK!
Yeah.
We know that guy! And this movie is just full, this movie's just full of, you know the Wizard of Oz? The joke is, Mank is like, I swear, if they don't figure out that lion, the Wizard of Oz is gonna flop.
Even the dog's name is bad.
And it's like, wow, that's funny.
Cool.
It's so funny when a movie says a movie that was famous isn't going to be famous.
Also, I was watching the credits, and I don't know how I missed this. It must have been at a party or something. Charlie Chaplin's a character in this movie? There's somebody credited as Charlie Chaplin?
What?
Yeah.
I didn't catch that.
I didn't catch him anywhere. But apparently he's in the movie.
Oh, you know the scene where Mank goes to visit Irving, what was his name? Thalberg. When he goes to visit Irving Thalberg and he's putting out a fire, and then he goes on the phone and he goes, never let the Marx Brothers in my office ever again. Do you know what that's referring to?
I mean, it's no.
The Marx Brothers. Well, the Marx Brothers went in there once, and they what was it? They were really mad at him about something, and they went in there, and they what did they do? They lit something on fire. It's like a historical moment that happened.
Because he said they've been cooking hot dogs again.
Yeah, and they went in and they did something in his office, and I just think it's very accurate, and I hate it when movies do this where they go, this is a funny little historical story that we won't show you.
That we're not going to show you, actually.
Or explain. And I go, well, that sounds fun.
Yeah.
No, it's just like...
I wonder...
Because then, what's the joke about that? If you don't know that story, which so many people, no one would, unless you've read the book about how this happened or whatever, it's like, oh, we just get excited that the Marx Brothers got mentioned?
Yeah,
and that's the extent of it, right?
And it feels like... So much of this movie is, like, deliberately tossing in historical figures who Mank knew and worked with and all this stuff, but it wants to be wider than that, so it keeps referencing things and people that my tinfoil hat theory is the estates of those people didn't give their permission to use, so they never show up, they just get mentioned. It's like, yeah, I guess we'll talk about the Marx Brothers, you're never going to see them because we couldn't get the rights to that. You know, like, that's what this movie feels like.
Yeah.
Oh,
you know what it really reminds me of when historical, when period pieces are just, because I told you when that Oppenheimer thing happened, I read a lot of history books. I read a lot of books about history, and oftentimes a history book will be like I read this book once about, the Chicago World's Fair, and it was like talking about this guy who invented, this guy and the Ferris wheel, and then it goes, and this one kid went and he saw the Ferris wheel, and he loved the Ferris wheel. And it would inspire him later when he was Walt Disney. And you're like, whoa.
Cool.
Cool. And like, but in a book, it's like it's more fun to me in a book because the book gets to like weave that together and be like,
Yeah.
oh, and also this, and I just go, oh, interesting, because I'm there literally to just gain information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm there when you're reading history. Sure, you want like a bit of a story, but you're mostly there to learn.
Well, I think it also works better in books because there's an internality that exists there that can't in film. When you read Young Man Went and that was Walt Disney, that's all you need to know. In a movie, to get that information across, you'd have to show a little kid and someone go, Walter Elias Disney, get over here. Like, and that is clunky as shit. That sucks.
And it's always clunky. And so when a period piece really wants to do that, when they want to be like a young senator named John F. Kennedy, or when they want Mank to go, The Wizard of Oz will be a flop, let me tell you that. It just feels like when The Big Bang Theory would make a nerd reference, and that was the extent of the joke.
100%.
Like, the extent of the joke was just someone being like, Doctor Who, and then the audience, and then like the canned audience laughs, and it just feels like in this movie they do a similar thing where they're just like, 42nd Street was a good movie, and I'm just like, okay, yeah. Why are we talking about this? Like, is it just to like, I don't know. But are we being unfair? Are there other movie genres that like constantly refer to their things in their world, but just because we already know what they like? When Star Wars is like, I'm going to the Tashi station to pick up the power converters.
Yeah.
Does that feel natural because we don't already know what that is? If we knew in our world what a Tashi station was, does it feel like a reference? Does it feel like an annoying reference? Like, how much of this is just world building is what I mean. How much of saying, I saw 42nd Street and it was good, how much of that is world building versus how much of it is an annoying reference?
I think it entirely depends on what the delivery is.
Sure.
Right? Like, you can do world building. You can do things like that to imply that there is stuff going on beyond the confines of this story and this screen that makes the world feel lived in and real. Where you run into trouble is if you are like winking at the audience about it, you know? Like, a good example for me is like something that comes to mind is Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, right? It's enough for us when they arrive at Area 51 and they open up the warehouse and there's all the crates and we go, oh, that's the warehouse from Raiders. And that's enough. Like, we get that. And it's like the camera doesn't draw attention to it. It draws attention to the fact that there's so many boxes they're going to have to look through. But if you're thinking about it, you know where they are, right? Then at the end of that sequence, they drive a bunch of trucks to the crates or whatever, and the Russians are getting away, and it starts on the Russians looking at the Russians, and for no good reason, the camera pans down, and it reveals one of the crates busted open slightly, and the Ark of the Covenant is sitting inside there. You can see it a little bit. And then we move on. Like, that's it. Like, that is the tone that it becomes an issue. And this movie has that rampant, where it's like, oh, we expect you to recognize this thing. It's not a thing that provides any sort of context or like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, the most we get would probably be, you know, Orson Welles on the phone talking about his like project that he's on. And like, he's in makeup backstage. Like, that version of it is fine because like, okay, he's in that world. That's what's going on with him right now. But just Mank talking to nobody about movies that only we know about doesn't do anything, right? Like, it's not a central plot point that he has an opinion about Wizard of Oz. He just keeps bringing it up so that we go, oh, he thinks it's going to be a flop, but actually it's going to be a timeless classic.
And that's funny, Parker.
I don't think so. I really don't think it is.
I really
But that's my answer to that question, is that like, I do think it is entirely like what kind of tone you have with it. And this movie is constantly winking and nudging the audience, you know?
Yeah.
That's what I think. What about you?
I agree. I just wanted to give it a fair shake of like, are we just being mean? Because movies can just mention a thing and that's fine. But like, I think you're right about the tone.
Yeah.
And I think the tone for this movie is just it's just kind of weird. It just doesn't work for me. It doesn't work for me.
No. It also just, it's one of those things that a lot of people have issues with, and I'm kind of like middle of the ground on it, depending on what the movie is. But generally speaking, I would agree that like Hollywood making movies about Hollywood is just kind of a tough sell. It just inevitably it ends up being slightly too self-congratulatory, I think. And this one, like, threads that needle fairly well of like, hey, here's all the problems that go on in Hollywood, and doesn't it kind of suck? But also, we're following this guy who's writing the, quote, greatest movie of all time, and everybody's telling him it's the greatest movie of all time.
Right.
It's like, okay, and?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I feel like, you know, going into this movie, you do kind of expect it to be a lot more like, oh, the old days. And
Right.
to its credit, it isn't that.
It isn't that.
To its credit, this movie portrays Hollywood as, you know, it portrays Mayer as a terrible man. It portrays, well, it does. It tells us that Hearst inspired a terrible man in a movie.
Yeah.
And it shows like the, you know, the deceit and the control and like the propaganda. And I think that's all great. Like, I'm glad that that's in here, because it would be a worse movie if it was just like,
Hollywood, baby.
Movies are great.
Yeah.
Catch you at the Oscars next year. And that is how this movie kind of ends.
And that's how it ends. And that's the thing. Is like, I agree with you. Like,
because this movie's last line is the magic of the movies. Right. And then everyone claps and laughs, and then that's the end. It is
a lesser version of the sin that Babylon has, where Babylon spends the entirety telling you how shitty and awful movies and Hollywood and this entire industry is, and then it tries to get an emotional gut punch of you of like, here is a montage of cinema that is the most inspiring thing ever, and aren't movies the best? And it's like, no, you spent the entire movie telling me how much they suck and how much you, Damien Chazelle, hate making movies. This movie does a lesser version of that.
It does. It is an interesting film. Even just like David Fincher, you know, he's often portrayed as a cynic. He's a very nihilist filmmaker. I think there is hope in his movies, but that's an element, obviously.
Sure.
Is kind of that nihilism. And it is interesting that this movie still has that, but it's like, I don't know, everything about it being a love letter makes it so weird.
Yeah.
Because it's like a love letter to this man who wrote a movie, but it's also like, doesn't the director and the star of this movie kind of suck? And you go, does he? It doesn't seem like you want to say that he sucks. But you also don't want to like say that maybe, you know, Cale's book was wrong.
Yeah, it feels entirely neutral about its subject matter. Which is a really bad place to be. Like, because that is the purpose of a documentary.
I was going to say, in that case, do a documentary.
You can be impartial. You can say, hey, I don't make him a saint. I don't make him a martyr. I just say, hey, this is something that existed, you know?
Yeah.
And documentaries are much better at doing that. When you make a film, inherently, it's like, okay, well, what do you think about this subject matter? What do you think about this person you're telling us a story about? What do you think about what he's writing and creating? And like you say, it doesn't double down. It's like, okay, is this about him and Orson and the frictions between them? Is this about the writing of Citizen Kane? Because that's like the reason this movie exists. We would not have this movie if he didn't write Citizen Kane, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Like that's the whole thing. And so it's like, okay, if you're going to do that, if that is the reason this movie is justified in existing, then why aren't you engaging with that except for on like the barest fringe where like it's also just weird to me to spend so much time figuring out how like Marion and Hearst feel about this and not how Orson or Mank feel about this, you know?
Yeah.
Like that conversation of like, well, you got it right because he was a lonely child. And like, you see there's a moment on Mank's face where he's like, maybe I misjudged the man. Maybe he's just a human being like the rest of us. Like, what are you talking about? You know, like what is this?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. This movie is so hard to discuss because the movie doesn't know what it's talking about.
Parker, it's talking about Mank.
Cool.
That's it.
That's it.
It's about Mank, who was a 44-year-old man played by a 62-year-old.
Yep.
Weird movie.
Weird movie.
Should we just do criteria?
I think so. I think we have drained this well dry.
Parker. Historical and technical relevance. Okay, real quick. Other good thing about this movie. Reznor and Ross score.
I do like the score. Yeah.
I think the score for this movie is really great. They recorded it during the pandemic, which means that, and they also used exclusively instruments that were period accurate.
Cool.
To record it. And also, since it was a pandemic, every member of the orchestra recorded their parts individually and sent them in, and then they compiled them together.
Interesting.
Which is, I think, pretty interesting, kind of cool. That's a fun
cool
little
feat.
historical detail and a cool feat of the movie. I like the score.
Yeah.
That's about it. That's all I wanted to say. But historical technical relevance, if you could just repeat your point, your very eloquent point. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. No. Can't
Point
hold
to
a candle to Kane. Point to Kane. How well is it doing what it's trying to do?
I don't know what it's trying to do. I have the slightest idea what this thing's trying to do. If it's trying to be about Mank, it doesn't do a very good job. If it's trying to be about Citizen Kane, it doesn't do a very good job.
Yeah, what is
this trying to do?
It feels like it's not doing a ton.
No.
Well. Yeah, so this is interesting. I just found this here. When asked about the controversy surrounding authorship, Fincher stated that his movie does not aim to settle the issue. It was not my interest to make a movie about a posthumous credit arbitration. I was interested in making a movie about a man who agreed not to take any credit and who then changed his mind. That was interesting to me.
That is the last 15 minutes, David. You didn't make a movie about that. That is the last 15 minutes of him going, literally, they have a conversation. Hey, do you want credit? And he's like, no, it's okay. And then he changes his mind. And that is, what is the rest? Okay. Oh my God. Yeah.
So I guess point to Kane.
Point to Kane, because that's not the movie you made, Fincher. I don't know what to tell you.
Have you seen a lot of Fincher's movies? Do you like Fincher as a director?
I think Fincher is a very accomplished director. Like, he's very good at what he does. I think his movies are a little clinical for me overall. Sure. Like, I like The Social Network quite a bit. I think it's a really, really good movie. But you know, I'm kind of whatever on the rest of it. Sure. Mostly just because I don't find gritty pessimism to be a antidote to the world. You know, I don't think it makes you interesting just to be edgy and pessimistic. But like, his technical skills as a director, I do think are really interesting. Like, Zodiac has a lot of really strong direction in his use of the camera and how he's, you know, getting performances out of those actors. But overall, like, he's nowhere near my top 10. What about you?
Just wait until I bring Benjamin Button to the show. Bringing that guy over.
Wow.
Would it have been more interesting if we talked about Benjamin Button? Yes.
Probably.
It would have. Probably. Anyway, we talked about Mank. What do I think of Fincher? I like Fincher. I watched all of his movies last year for the first time for the most part. Like, I'd only seen The Social Network and Mank. Yeah. So last year I saw them all. I really like The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. I think that movie, even though it's very dark and disgusting in places, I think that it ultimately is kind of about friendship.
Yeah.
And I think that's really neat. And I weirdly liked Benjamin Button for some reason. Sure. It would just to say I didn't hate it, but I just kind of vibed with it. And I think that his recreation of, speaking of this movie, he recreated eras with such meticulous detail. And I think that what I really like about that movie is just passing through time. Yeah. I just really enjoy passing through time in that movie, and everything else about it feels weird. But yeah, I think as like a visual work, I really enjoyed it. I don't know. I liked more of his movies than I thought I would.
Sure.
I'd say that. I wouldn't say he's like one of my favorite directors, but I would say I enjoyed more of his movies than I didn't enjoy them, I would say.
That's fair.
But I didn't revisit Mank last year because I knew that it was boring.
Yeah.
Okay, so point to Kane. Do you like this movie?
No.
Okay, all right.
Not a bit.
Well, thanks, everybody. I also don't like this movie very much. Kane has done a clean sweep
Yeah.
as Parker just said. Taking a step back though, Parker, is this better than Citizen Kane?
Not even remotely.
Okay. All right.
See,
well,
that's the thing is like
it's an interesting question.
the other movies, like other movies have a chance because they're doing their own thing. Any movie that is about Citizen Kane is not going to be better than Citizen Kane.
That's true.
Just isn't gonna. It's not going to happen.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was fun to try.
It was like I enjoy having an episode where you and I are like, man, this movie sucks. We don't get enough of those. We watch too many good movies.
We don't get enough of those. Do you want to since I made you watch this movie, do you want to do the honors and say the end of the episode?
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, Mank is not better than Citizen Kane.
Womp womp. No Mank
Womp
you.
womp.
No Mank you.
Mank you.
Well, good news though, Parker. Next week we're back with a good movie.
Yeah.
Next week we'll be joined by my pal Brogan Boas. And we will be talking about Godzilla 1954. We're covering the original.
The OG.
The OG Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
Very fun.
And that stands for Original Godzilla. OG.
Yes. Original Godzilla is what we just said.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you for pointing that out, Parker.
Of course.
Thanks a lot. What?
Huh?
Who said that? I wish I had like a little line of dialogue to.
I thought about
Mank
working
off
up.
with.
I thought about working up a Mank impression, but I just didn't have it in me. I did not care enough to try. So here we are.
Well, let's just pretend that we said something really smart and really funny.
Yeah.
And then we end the episode.
Here, I'll end it on this actually.
Okay.
If I ever go to the electric chair, I hope Mank is sitting on my lap. There you go.
Does they say that in the movie?
Yes, they do.
I missed that one. What?
Who
who said that?
Lily Collins is saying, "You hate Mayor, don't you?" And he goes, If I ever went to the electric chair, I'd want him sitting on my lap."
Okay, yeah, that is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Initially, I didn't understand what that meant, and I was like,
What are you talking about?
You want to like cuddle him? Like you love him?
No.
But I see. It's so that he gets electrocuted too.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought the guy who played Mayor was pretty good at playing a little asshole.
Yeah.
He did all right. Should I have a party where everyone wears circus attire?
Why not?
All right. I don't know why Hearst did it. It felt very not like something Hearst would do, but
why did Hearst
Amanda
do it?
Seyfried did look good in the marching band outfit. That was fun for her.
Mm-hmm.
Also, okay, last note. I know we're well past the ending of this episode. We got over the hour mark, so that's cool. Not that matters. Historically speaking, this movie posits that Mank was kicked out of Hearst's parties for his political speeches. It's really because he was encouraging Marion Davies to drink.
Yeah.
And this movie's like, what if he had a big rousing monologue about Citizen Kane? What if he said, I'm going to write Citizen Kane about... He said, I'm going to write Citizen Kane about you.
Mm-hmm.
I do like how defeated he looks when Mayor's like, he pays your paycheck.
Pays half your salary, you
and
idiot.
I really like how Gary Oldman played that of just like, huh?
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Bye, Mank.
Bye, Mank. Thanks for
Bye,
tuning in,
Mank.
everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next time.
See you next time.